I think it's the 10th of December.
December 10th, okay?
Okay.
So we were up early in Hurghada, and they took us to the Luxor. They took us to the airport in Hurghada, where they had a chartered plane. We waited for a little bit, but then we got on the plane and flew to Luxor, unloaded from the plane, and they took us on buses to go see the Karnak temple. Do you want to, let's see.
Okay.
Say, well, I can say that on the buses, we drove across the Nile, and there were a lot of irrigation canals there. And there were a lot of crops, because this is a green alluvial floodplain of the Nile, although only the lower part floods, not nearly as badly as it used to flood before the Aswan Dam. So they grow a lot of crops here. In fact, was it 90% of the people in Egypt live along the, 90 or 95% of people in Egypt live along the Nile, because it's the only arable, fertile place to grow crops in the country. So there were bananas and sugarcane, mango, things like that. Jim, do you want to say more after that?
Yeah. Along the drive, one of the things that we do is we drove across the Avenue of the Sphinxes, which has got something like 1,000 sphinxes in it.
Mm-hmm. It was newly unearthed, and it was just like a road. There was a bridge and there was a road with all these sphinxes.
Right.
So it was very cool.
And after a little bit, we got out to the temple complex of Karnak. And there we went inside the museum, and we saw this model of the temple, and then walked out into the site. As we enter up through the site, we go past, once again, sphinxes on both sides. These sphinxes had ram's heads and lions' bodies.
Mm-hmm. Can I say a little bit about the temple that I thought was interesting?
Sure.
Was that towards the end, not maybe during the Middle Kingdom or the newer kingdom, each pharaoh added something special to this temple. So many of the items that we saw were added subsequently, and then added on, and then added on. So it was a huge temple, but it had been added on with each pharaoh putting their distinctive mark on it with something, like the ram's heads or an obelisk or whatever.
Yeah, I think it was it Ramses the first, second, third, and fourth, something like that. I don't know. I forget who it was.
Yes, and Hatshepsut also
Hatshepsut?
Yeah, had an obelisk. The only female pharaoh. Well, one of the only few female pharaohs.
Right. Anyways, so it was really a magnificent site. They had, as you walked down the avenue, the central avenue, they had these pylons that would rise up on either side. They're these rectangular buildings, kind of like, I don't know, huge truncated structures that you would walk between. And on one of them, the one that wasn't finished, that we went by first, they still had these brick and, Terry thinks, soil ramps that were built up onto it. The idea was that they would lay the stonework and then build a ramp up, and then lay the next tier of stonework and build the ramp up higher until they got all the stones up. Mm-hmm. And then they would carve on it and paint on it. And as they carved and painted from the top down, they would take away the brick ramps. Pretty clever sort of approach to it. Inside, and there were also these large statues, pharaonic statues.
What kind of statues?
Like pharaonic,
Pharaonic.
like of a pharaoh.
Oh, pharaoh. Okay.
You want me to say pharaonic?
Well, I didn't hear the word pharaonic. I just heard statues of pharaohs. I don't think people would know what a pharaonic is.
Yeah, I don't know what it is really. I
think
I made it up.
I think you made it up.
But
yeah,
I think it's a good word.
It is a good word.
I'm going to stand
and
by
once
this
you
one.
know what it means, it makes sense.
Sure. Anyways, there were these great bas relief carvings on it, and the pillars are just massive for it, just massive. And, you know, they had a flat lintel top across them, and the carvings were beautiful, and a lot of them were painted. So
yeah, and the paint was still there, and up where it had been protected, where there was like a lintel in the ceiling or something like that, you could still see quite colorful painting that was left.
right. And they had obelisks that were carved out of a single piece of granite. Anyways, the whole temple I thought was pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were finished with that, we drove back across the Nile in our bus, and went past the temple of Luxor, which was right next to the hotel. But the temple, when we looked at it, it had pylons, these vertical structures, and it had massive pillars. So it was very similar to what we saw at Karnak, same style. Let's see.
So
Yeah, and then we went to our hotel, and out of our bedroom window we could see the Temple of Luxor, which was very cool.
And then we were invited to high tea on the terrace, and that was lovely. And there was a fellow playing the flute. Maybe I should get over by this. And we ended up sitting very close to where he was playing the flute, and the noise was too much. So we got a beautiful spot farther away, and that was very nice.
Right.
What after that is dinner?
Oh, yeah, my notes are not very clear right now. We went back, cleaned up a little bit, and went to dinner. And on our way to dinner, we went out and walked in the garden, and they had this beautiful garden. Yeah. By the way, this hotel, and I forget the name of it, the Winter Palace.
The Winter Palace.
Kings had stayed there. Agatha Christie stayed there when she wrote Death on the Nile. All sorts of people.
The person who found King Tut's tomb announced it from a balcony in the Winter Palace.
Yeah.
So it's showing its age a bit, but it was so much fun to be there with all the history.
Good point. so they had these lovely gardens. We had a good dinner.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any pictures of it. Then we went out for a walk that night. We walked across the road and could look back at the Winter Palace all lit up at night, and then walked along the Nile, which had riverboats and feluccas. Feluccas are like these little sailboats, maybe 20, 30 foot long, for ferrying goods and people around.
Mm-hmm. They were all tied up on the side. They weren't sailing at night. But
Right, yeah. And there were people out strolling.
mm-hmm.
At one point we came across this bride and groom, and it was lovely.
Yeah, and these two girls, probably 12 years old or so, stopped us and asked if they could take selfies with us. Asked where we were from and asked if they could take selfies with us. So we did it. I mean,
Yeah.
they were cute.
And we went back to the hotel and crashed.
Sounds good.
Here we go.
So you don't get these things in it. Okay.